The red warning lights bathed the command center in an eerie glow as Commander Vextar stared at the tactical display. His 4 eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. Ship after ship disappeared from the screen as the Vorthak swarm tore through their defenses like paper. The Coalition had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their technology was so advanced that most species considered them gods. Their energy shields could stop anything. Their plasma cannons could melt through entire moons. But none of that mattered now. "Commander, we're getting reports from the Outer Rim," his aide said, his voice shaking. The young officer's tentacles were wrapped tightly around his console, trying to steady himself. "The Vorthak have consumed the Altair system. 20 billion lives, gone." Vextar closed his eyes. 20 billion. The number was so large it didn't feel real. But he had seen the footage. The Vorthak didn't just kill their enemies. They absorbed them. Turned them into more bioships for their endless swarm. 3 years ago, the Vorthak had appeared from the dark space between galaxies. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted. They just consumed everything in their path. Planets, stars, entire civilizations. Nothing stopped them. The Coalition had thrown everything at them. The best ships, the smartest admirals, weapons that could crack planets in half. Nothing worked. The Vorthak ships were alive. They learned. They adapted. Every weapon used against them only made them stronger. "Sir, the 7th Fleet is requesting immediate backup," another officer called out. "Admiral Krentork says they can't hold the line much longer." Vextar watched the display as more red dots winked out of existence. The 7th Fleet had been their strongest. 2,000 ships with crews totaling over 1 million beings. Now maybe 50 ships remained. "Tell Admiral Krentork to fall back to the inner systems," Vextar ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, if we lose the 7th Fleet, there's nothing between the Vorthak and the core worlds. We're talking about trillions of lives." The commander knew the numbers. Everyone in the room knew the numbers. They had run the calculations 100 times. The Coalition was dying. Not just losing a war, but facing total extinction. "What about the secret weapons program?" someone suggested. "The quantum disruptors. Deployed last month at the Battle of Rigel. The Vorthak adapted to them within hours. The time distortion fields. Same result. They learn faster than we can innovate." Vextar stared at the galaxy map. Most of it was now red. Vorthak territory. Only a small cluster of blue remained around the core worlds. And even that was shrinking. His aide approached carefully. "Commander, there is one option we haven't considered." "What?" "The quarantine zone. Sector 7. The humans." Every being in the room went silent. The humans. Everyone knew about them, but no one talked about them. 50 years ago, they had made first contact with a peaceful exploration ship. The humans had somehow interpreted it as an attack and destroyed the entire diplomatic convoy. "The barbarians from Sol 3, another officer scoffed. "They still use projectile weapons. They fight wars with metal bullets and chemical explosives. They're barely more advanced than animals." But Vextar was thinking. The humans were violent, yes. Impossibly violent by galactic standards. They had wars that lasted decades. They fought over resources, territory, ideas, even the color of their skin. The Coalition had quarantined them to prevent their savage culture from spreading. "Get me a connection to Earth," Vextar said quietly. "Sir." "You heard me. Open a channel to the human homeworld." On the planet Earth, in a building called the Pentagon, Admiral Tyrone Washington was reviewing reports from the Mars colonies when his communication system lit up. The old soldier had seen combat on 4 continents and 3 moons. His hair was gray, his face was scarred, and his eyes had seen too much war. The alien face that appeared on his screen looked desperate. Vextar began speaking through a translator device, explaining the situation. The Vorthak swarm. The dying Coalition. The need for help. Washington listened without interruption. When the alien finished, the human leaned back in his chair and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "So let me get this straight," Washington said. "You folks have been treating us like dangerous animals for 50 years. Wouldn't even let us leave our own solar system. And now that your fancy technology can't save you, you want our help." Yes. We need your military assistance." "What makes you think we'd help the people who imprisoned us?" Vextar's voice was barely a whisper. "Because if the Vorthak aren't stopped, they'll come for Earth too. Eventually, they consume everything." Washington thought about this for a long moment. Then he pressed a button on his desk. Get me Colonel Davis and Captain Johnson. Tell them to prep the fleet. Full combat deployment. Sir, are you sure about this? His aide asked. Washington stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling military complex. Son, we've been preparing for this kind of fight our whole lives. We might not have fancy energy weapons, but we've got something these aliens don't understand. What's that, sir? Pure, stubborn, human meanness. And sometimes, that's exactly what the universe needs. Within 6 hours, Earth's first interstellar battle fleet was ready to launch. Ships that had been built for war, crewed by people who understood war, carrying weapons designed for one purpose, winning at any cost. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, Washington sent one final message to the Coalition Command. We're coming. Try not to die before we get there. The space around Kepler Station rippled like water as the quantum gate opened. Captain Keisha Johnson gripped the controls of her flagship, the USS Defiant, as it emerged from the swirling portal. Behind her came wave after wave of human warships. 200 vessels in total, each one built for one purpose, war. The Coalition commanders watching from their command ships couldn't believe their eyes. These weren't the sleek, elegant vessels they were used to seeing. Human ships looked like flying fortresses made of steel and fury. They bristled with weapons that the aliens hadn't seen in centuries. By the 7 moons, muttered Admiral Vextar as he studied the tactical display. Those are nuclear warheads. And are those, kinetic cannons? His aide, a young officer named Drintal, pulled up the weapon specifications on his screen. Sir, according to our sensors, they're using projectile weapons. Metal bullets fired by chemical explosions. Their biggest guns literally throw chunks of metal at enemy ships. Vextar felt a chill run through his forearms. But those weapons are ancient. We stopped using kinetic weapons over 2,000 years ago when we developed energy shields. The human fleet spread out in what looked like a complete mess to the Coalition observers. There was no formation, no organized pattern. Ships moved in different directions like they were all following their own orders. Lieutenant Colonel Deshaun Davis was commanding a squadron of heavy cruisers when the Coalition frequency crackled to life. Human vessels, please maintain proper formation. Your current deployment violates 17 different tactical protocols. Davis laughed so hard he nearly choked on his coffee. Tactical protocols? Friend, we threw those out the window about 3 wars ago. We fight dirty, we fight mean, and we fight to win. But without proper formation, you'll be destroyed in minutes, Vextar protested over the comm. That's what they all say, Davis replied. Right before we prove them wrong. The Vorthak swarm appeared on long-range sensors like a living storm cloud. Billions of bioships moved together in perfect harmony. Each ship was grown rather than built, a living creature that could think, adapt, and evolve. They had consumed half the galaxy by learning from every battle, becoming immune to whatever weapons were used against them. Coalition forces immediately began their retreat. It was textbook military strategy. Fall back to defensive positions, use long-range energy weapons to thin out the enemy numbers, then counterattack when the time was right. It was how civilized species had fought wars for millennia. The humans did something completely different. They accelerated toward the enemy. What are your forces doing? Vextar demanded, his voice rising in panic. They are flying directly into the swarm. Captain Johnson's voice came through the comm, calm and steady. Admiral Washington's orders were clear. When in doubt, charge. That's suicide. Maybe. But it's also Tuesday. The first wave of Vorthak bioships crashed into the human fleet like a tsunami of living metal. The Coalition commanders watched in horror, expecting to see the human ships torn apart in seconds. Instead, something impossible happened. The bioships started exploding. Captain Trevor Brown was piloting his destroyer, the Denver, when he spotted a cluster of asteroids floating near the battle zone. While the Coalition ships were busy firing their energy weapons at the Vorthak fleet, Brown had a different idea. All ships, this is Brown. Watch and learn. His destroyer launched 6 nuclear warheads, but not at the enemy. Instead, the missile streaked toward the asteroid field and detonated in a chain of brilliant explosions. The blast waves sent thousands of massive rocks hurtling through space at incredible speeds. The Vorthak bioships had spent millions of years evolving defenses against energy weapons. Their organic armor could absorb plasma blasts, deflect laser beams, and even survive direct hits from antimatter cannons. But they had no defense against a 10-ton chunk of rock moving at 50,000 miles per hour. The asteroid smashed through the bioships like bowling balls through paper. Dozens of enemy vessels exploded in showers of organic debris. The survivors tried to adapt, growing thicker armor and stronger shields. But you can't adapt to physics. Mass times velocity equals dead alien. Impossible, Vextar whispered as he watched the tactical display. How did they know that would work? Captain Johnson's voice crackled through the comm. We didn't. But humans have a saying, if you can't fix it with explosives, you're not using enough explosives. The coalition forces stared in amazement as the human fleet carved through the Vorthak swarm like a chainsaw through butter. These weren't sophisticated energy weapons or advanced technology. This was pure, brutal physics applied with human creativity. Lieutenant Colonel Davis was having the time of his life as his cruiser's kinetic cannons hammered the bioships. Each shot was just a dense metal slug accelerated to incredible speeds, but the impact was devastating. The bioship's adaptive armor meant nothing when faced with simple momentum. Vextar, you still there? Davis called out over the comm. Yes, Colonel. I'm here. Good. Here's lesson 1 in human warfare. Sometimes the old ways work best. Your people got so focused on fancy technology that you forgot the basics. Physics doesn't care how advanced you are. A rock going fast enough will ruin anyone's day. As the human fleet pressed their attack, more Vorthak bioships fell to weapons that should have been obsolete. Nuclear explosions tore through formations that energy shields couldn't protect against. Kinetic rounds punched holes through armor that had evolved to stop laser beams. Sir, Drintal called out excitedly, the Vorthak are retreating. It was true. For the first time in 3 years, the bioships were pulling back. They had encountered something they couldn't adapt to fast enough. Human unpredictability backed up by weapons that worked through pure force rather than sophisticated technology. Captain Johnson opened a channel to the Coalition command ship. Admiral Vextar, this is just the warm-up. Wait until you see what we do when we really get creative. The alien commander stared at his tactical display, where the red dots representing the Vorthak fleet were actually retreating for the first time since the war began. Maybe these primitive humans with their crude weapons might actually have a chance. Or maybe they were all completely insane. Either way, it was working. Major Lisa Thompson sat in the command center of her heavy cruiser, watching 6 different screens at once. Each screen showed a different part of the battle, and each part looked like complete chaos. To the coalition observers, it seemed like the humans had lost their minds. But Thompson knew better. This wasn't chaos at all. This was how humans fought when they were serious. Deshawn, take your squadron through that debris field, she ordered into her headset. Use the wreckage as cover and hit them from behind. Lieutenant Colonel Davis's voice crackled back through the comm. Copy that, Lisa. We're going in hot. Thompson switched to another channel. Trevor, I need you to ram that big biocruiser. The one that looks like a giant squid. Captain Brown's cheerful voice responded immediately. Roger that. Always wanted to see how these alien ships crumple when you hit them with a few thousand tons of earth steel. Make sure your crew evacuates to the escape pods first. Already done. We're riding this one all the way to impact. The coalition commanders watching from their safe distance couldn't understand what they were seeing. Human ships moved like they were all following different orders. Some charged straight at the enemy. Others hid behind asteroids. A few seemed to be running away, only to circle back and attack from unexpected angles. Admiral Vextar had commanded fleets for over 200 years. He had studied every major battle in galactic history. He understood formations, strategies, and tactical doctrines. But this? This made no sense at all. They have no discipline, his aide Drintal observed. No formation integrity. No unified command structure. How are they winning? The answer came when Captain Brown's destroyer slammed into the Vorthak biocruiser at full speed. The impact was so violent it lit up space like a small star. Both ships exploded in a shower of metal and organic debris. But the explosion took out 3 other bioships that had been hiding behind the cruiser. Because they're not trying to win pretty, Vextar whispered. They're just trying to win. The Vorthak swarm had conquered half the galaxy by learning from their enemies. Every time they fought a new species, they adapted. Energy weapons? They grew reflective armor. Plasma cannons? They developed heat-resistant skin. Antimatter bombs? They learned to disperse their mass to minimize damage. But humans didn't fight like any species they had encountered before. Humans didn't follow rules. They made up new ones as they went along. Sergeant Carlos Rivera was leading a boarding party toward a damaged Vorthak bioship when his orders came through. Rivera, that ship is still alive but disabled. I need you and your team to get inside and see if you can turn it against its own fleet. How exactly are we supposed to do that, Major? I don't know. Figure it out. Rivera looked at his team of 12 Marines. They were all carrying standard assault rifles, plasma grenades, and boarding equipment. The coalition forces would have brought sophisticated cutting tools, computer specialists, and maybe a few scientists to study the bioship systems. Rivera's approach was simpler. All right, people. We're going to blow a hole in that thing and storm inside. Once we're in there, we'll figure out how to make it dance to our tune. Sir, what if we don't know how to operate alien biotechnology? Asked Corporal Martinez. Then we'll improvise. That's what humans do. The boarding shuttle attached to the bioship's hull with a loud clang. Rivera's team placed shaped charges around what looked like a weak spot and everyone took cover. The explosion blew a ragged hole through the organic armor, and the Marines poured through the smoking gap. Inside the bioship was like being inside a living creature. The walls pulsed with blood vessels. Strange organic computers flickered with alien thoughts. Everything was wet, warm, and alive. This is disgusting, muttered Private Johnson as he stepped over what looked like a giant nerve cluster. Yeah, but look at all these nerve endings, Rivera said, pulling out a portable generator and some copper wire. Back in basic training, we learned that all living things with nervous systems can be shocked. Let's see if that applies to alien ships too. The Marines attached electrodes to the largest nerve clusters they could find. Rivera cranked up the generator to maximum power and sent a massive electrical surge through the bioship's nervous system. The result was immediate and spectacular. The entire ship convulsed like it was having a seizure. Its weapons systems went haywire, firing in all directions. 3 nearby Vorthak vessels were destroyed by their own allies' confused attack. Biology 101, Rivera muttered as he watched the bioship turn its guns on the rest of the swarm. Everything with nerves can be shocked into doing stupid things. From his command ship, Admiral Vextar watched in amazement as the humans accomplished in 3 hours what the Coalition hadn't managed in 3 years. They weren't just fighting the Vorthak. They were turning the bioships against each other. How do you adapt so quickly? He asked Admiral Washington over the comm. The old human soldier's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Son, we've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We've had wars over land, resources, religion, politics, and sometimes just because we didn't like the way the other guy looked at us. Fighting aliens is just Tuesday for us. But your methods are so chaotic. Chaos works. Your people got used to fighting by the rules. Nice, clean energy weapons. Proper formations. Predictable strategies. The Vorthak learned to beat that because it was logical. But humans? We don't do logical. We do whatever works. Major Thompson was coordinating 12 different attacks when she noticed something interesting on her tactical display. The Vorthak were trying to adapt to human tactics, but they couldn't. Every time they thought they figured out what the humans were doing, the humans did something completely different. Davis, how's that flanking maneuver going? We just convinced a bioship that it's actually a toaster, Davis replied. Rivera's electrical shock therapy is working great. The thing's trying to make breakfast instead of fighting. What about the main assault? Well, Jackson figured out how to hack their communication system by singing country music at it. Apparently, their organic computers can't handle Johnny Cash. Half their fleet is having what I can only describe as a musical breakdown. Thompson smiled as she watched another group of Vorthak ships retreat in confusion. The bioships had evolved to counter sophisticated attacks from advanced civilizations. But nobody had prepared them for humans who treated warfare like an art form where the only rule was that there were no rules. All units, this is Thompson. Press the attack. Show these aliens what controlled chaos really looks like. The human fleet surged forward, each ship following its own path toward victory. To outside observers, it looked like madness. But it was working. For the first time since the war began, the Vorthak swarm was losing ground to an enemy they couldn't understand, adapt to, or predict. Because you can't predict crazy. And humans, when they were fighting for their lives, were the best kind of crazy the universe had ever seen. Captain Andre Williams stood on the bridge of his heavy cruiser, the USS Baltimore, watching the battle unfold through the massive viewing screen. For the first time in 3 years of war, the Vorthak swarm was retreating. Not just falling back to regroup, but actually running away from a fight. Well, I'll be damned, Williams muttered, taking a sip of his coffee. Never thought I'd see the day when these bio-nightmares would turn tail and run. The Vorthak had pulled back to a safe distance, their billions of ships clustering together like a giant organic cloud. Williams could almost imagine them trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. For millions of years, they had consumed entire galaxies by adapting to their enemies. But humans? Humans were something completely new. Admiral Washington's voice crackled through the comm system from his flagship. "Thompson, what's your status on that biotech analysis? Please tell me you've figured out how these things work." Major Lisa Thompson was aboard her command cruiser, surrounded by screens showing captured Vorthak technology. Her team of engineers and computer specialists had been working non-stop since the first bioship had been disabled. "Sir, we've got good news and bad news," Thompson replied. "The bad news is that these ships are more complex than anything we've ever seen. They're not just alive, they're thinking. Each bioship has its own brain, its own personality, and its own way of solving problems." "And the good news?" "The good news is that they're still just computers. Really weird, squishy, organic computers, but computers nonetheless. And we humans have been breaking into computers since we invented them." Technical Sergeant Maya Jackson was hunched over a console that looked like it had grown instead of being built. The interface was covered in what looked like veins and nerve endings, pulsing with a soft blue light. She had been trying to crack the bioship's communication system for hours. "This is like trying to hack a brain," Jackson muttered, her fingers dancing across the organic keyboard. "Every time I think I understand how it works, it changes on me." Her teammate, Corporal Roberts, looked over her shoulder. "Maybe that's the problem. You're trying to think like a computer programmer. What if you tried thinking like a doctor instead?" Jackson paused. "You know what? That's not a bad idea." She pulled out a medical scanner from her toolkit and ran it over the bioship's neural interface. "If this thing is basically a giant brain, then maybe I can give it a headache." She began typing code, but instead of traditional programming language, she used patterns that mimicked human brainwaves. Within minutes, the bioship system started responding. "Holy shit," Jackson whispered. "It's working. The ship thinks I'm another bioship trying to communicate with it." "Can you get into their network?" Thompson asked. "Better than that. I can make them think whatever I want them to think." Jackson's fingers flew across the interface as she uploaded a specially designed virus into the bioship's neural network. The virus was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Traditional computer viruses were designed to destroy or steal data. This virus was designed to confuse. It made the bioships think they were getting contradictory orders from their own command structure. Within minutes, the effects became visible across the battlefield. Vorthak bioships began firing at random targets. Some started flying in circles. Others tried to retreat and advance at the same time, resulting in bizarre spinning motions that would have been hilarious if they weren't so deadly. "Jackson, you beautiful genius." Williams laughed as he watched a massive Vorthak dreadnought try to attack itself. "What did you do to them?" "I gave them the digital equivalent of schizophrenia," Jackson replied proudly. "Their own ships can't tell who's giving them orders anymore. Half of them think they're under attack by invisible enemies." But the real surprise came from the coalition forces. For 3 years, they had fought the Vorthak using traditional tactics. Energy weapons, defensive formations, and predictable strategies. It hadn't worked. But watching the humans fight had given them new ideas. Commander Vextar was aboard his flagship when his aide, Drintal, rushed over with an urgent report. "Sir, you need to see this. Captain Mordak of the Coalition cruiser Starfire has, well, he's improvising." Vextar looked at the tactical display and couldn't believe his eyes. The Starfire had detached from its formation and was using its mining lasers to carve chunks off nearby asteroids. Then it was launching the chunks at Vorthak ships using its cargo bay doors as makeshift catapults. "He's turning asteroids into ammunition," Vextar said in amazement. "It gets better, sir. Commander Zilnok has figured out how to overload her energy shields and use them as weapons. She's ramming bioships and letting the shield feedback fry their nervous systems." Across the fleet, coalition commanders who had followed the same military doctrines for thousands of years were suddenly thinking outside the box. They watched human ships use debris as camouflage, turn cargo containers into guided missiles, and coordinate attacks through popular music broadcasts. "Sir," Drintal continued, "Admiral Corvan has requested permission to, and I quote, try some of that crazy human stuff." "Granted," Vextar replied without hesitation. "Tell all coalition forces that standard tactical doctrine is suspended. I want them to think like humans." "Sir, with respect, humans don't think. They just react." "Exactly. And it's working. The change in the coalition fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that had spent the entire war retreating in orderly formations suddenly began charging into battle with reckless abandon. Ancient mining ships found new life as weapons platforms. Transport vessels became kamikaze missiles. Even scientific research ships started using their sensor arrays to jam Vorthak communications. Williams watched from his bridge as the tide of battle completely reversed. The Vorthak swarm, which had conquered half the galaxy through superior adaptation, couldn't cope with an enemy that refused to be predictable. "Admiral Washington," Williams called over the comm, "you seeing this? The aliens are learning from us." "I see it, Andre. Question is, are they learning fast enough?" The answer came in the form of a massive explosion as a coalition dreadnought used its main reactor as a bomb, taking out an entire Vorthak formation in a blaze of nuclear fire. "Sir," Thompson reported, "the virus has spread to over 60% of their fleet. Their command structure is completely compromised. And the coalition forces? They're fighting like humans now. Messy, chaotic, and completely unpredictable." Washington's voice carried a note of satisfaction. "Good. Maybe there's hope for this galaxy after all." The battlefield that had once been dominated by the organized efficiency of the Vorthak swarm was now pure chaos. But it was controlled chaos, directed by human ingenuity and adopted by alien allies who had finally learned that sometimes the best strategy was having no strategy at all. For the first time since the war began, victory seemed possible. The Vorthak could adapt to energy weapons and defensive tactics. But they couldn't adapt to pure, creative insanity backed up by the determination to win at any cost. The tide had turned, and the galaxy was learning that sometimes the best way to fight monsters was to be a little monstrous yourself. Admiral Tyrone Washington stood on the bridge of his flagship, the USS Freedom, staring at the tactical display that showed the final phase of the most important battle in galactic history. The Vorthak swarm had regrouped for one last desperate assault. Billions of bioships stretched across space like a living storm cloud, ready to consume everything in their path. But Washington wasn't worried. He had something the aliens didn't understand: humans who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Washington," he announced over the fleet-wide communication system. "Today we show this galaxy what happens when you corner a species that's been fighting wars since we learned to make fire. Execute Operation Madness." Captain Keisha Johnson's voice came through clearly from her flagship. "Copy that, sir. All units, remember what we learned in basic training: if it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid." The human fleet had spent the brief lull in battle doing what humans did best, turning everything they could find into weapons. Cargo containers had been packed with explosives and turned into guided missiles. Mining equipment had been converted into particle cannons. Even damaged space stations were being prepped as the galaxy's largest shotgun shells. Lieutenant Colonel Deshaun Davis was aboard his heavy cruiser, the Detroit, when he received his final orders. His ship had taken heavy damage in the previous battles. The hull was cracked, the engines were running on backup power, and half his weapon systems were offline. By any reasonable military standard, his ship should have been evacuated and abandoned. But Davis had never been accused of being reasonable. "All crew members, this is your captain speaking," Davis announced over the ship's intercom. "We've got one shot at this, and it's going to be a hell of a ride. Anyone who wants to transfer to the escape pods, now's your chance." Not a single crew member moved toward the escape pods. They had come too far to quit now. Davis smiled as he plotted a collision course with the largest Vorthak command ship. "Computer, give me maximum power to the engines. And while you're at it, start the self-destruct sequence. Set it for impact." "Sir, are you certain about this course of action?" the ship's AI asked. "Computer, we're about to ram a giant alien squid with a nuclear explosion." "Of course I'm certain." Technical Sergeant Maya Jackson was working frantically at her console, her fingers flying across the organic interface of a captured bioship. The computer virus she had created was spreading through the Vorthak network like wildfire, but she wasn't done yet. "Thompson, I've got an idea," Jackson called out to her commander. "What if instead of just confusing them, we made them think they're something else entirely?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we convinced their ships that they're actually Earth animals? Like, really stupid Earth animals?" Major Lisa Thompson stared at her for a moment. "Jackson, that's either brilliant or completely insane. Why not both?" Jackson began typing rapidly, uploading new code into the virus. Within minutes, Vorthak bioships across the battlefield began exhibiting strange behavior. Some started flapping their weapon appendages like they thought they were birds trying to fly. Others began making what could only be described as mating calls at nearby asteroids. "My God," whispered Commander Vextar from his observation ship. "They think are they trying to migrate south for the winter?" A group of Vorthak cruisers had formed a V formation and were flying in circles, apparently searching for a warmer climate. Another cluster was attempting to build what looked like a nest out of space debris. But the real masterstroke came from Captain Trevor Brown, who had somehow survived his previous kamikaze attack and was now commanding a replacement destroyer. He had spent the break in battle studying the Vorthak communication frequencies and had made a disturbing discovery. "Admiral Washington, I figured out how they coordinate their attacks," Brown reported. "They use a form of telepathic communication through quantum entanglement. But here's the thing, I can jam it." "How?" "Country music, sir. Specifically, really bad country music played at frequencies that interfere with their quantum brain waves. I've rigged every speaker on every human ship to broadcast simultaneously." "Do it." The result was immediate and catastrophic for the Vorthak. As the combined human fleet began broadcasting a horrific medley of off-key country songs, the bioship's coordination completely collapsed. Ships that had moved in perfect harmony for millions of years suddenly couldn't communicate with each other. The final assault began with Davis's cruiser slamming into the Vorthak command ship at full speed. The nuclear explosion lit up space like a small sun, creating a chain reaction that tore through the enemy formation. But that was just the opening act. Captain Andre Williams led a squadron of converted cargo ships directly into the heart of the swarm. Each ship was packed with every explosive device the humans could manufacture. As they detonated one by one, they created a corridor of destruction through the biofleet. "This is Williams," his voice crackled through the comm as his ship prepared for its final run. "Tell my wife I loved her, and tell the Vorthak they picked the wrong species to mess with." The explosion from Williams's ship triggered a cascade of detonations that spread through the Vorthak formation like dominoes falling. But the real genius came from Jackson's virus, which had convinced thousands of bioships that they were actually harmless Earth creatures. A massive Vorthak dreadnought, convinced it was a whale, began trying to communicate with other ships through haunting songs that completely disrupted their battle formation. Smaller bioships, thinking they were dolphins, started playing games with asteroids instead of fighting. The few Vorthak vessels that maintained their combat effectiveness found themselves facing coalition forces that had learned to fight like humans. Alien commanders who had spent centuries following rigid tactical doctrines were now improvising with reckless creativity. Admiral Vextar himself led a charge of coalition cruisers that had been retrofitted with human-designed kinetic weapons. For the first time in 3 years, he announced over the comm, "We're not retreating. All ships, attack pattern chaos." The final moments of the battle were pure pandemonium. Human ships exploded in brilliant nuclear fireballs, taking entire Vorthak formations with them. Jackson's virus spread through the remaining bioships, convincing them they were everything from house cats to extinct dinosaurs. Coalition forces, inspired by human audacity, threw away their rulebooks and fought with desperate creativity. When the last Vorthak ship either exploded or flew away in confusion, convinced it was migrating for the winter, the galaxy fell silent. "Admiral Washington," Commander Vextar's voice came through the comm, filled with awe and exhaustion. "It's over. The swarm is destroyed." Washington looked out at the debris field that had once been an unstoppable enemy fleet. Human ships hung dead in space, their crews having given everything for victory. But they had won. "Commander Vextar, you asked me earlier how humans adapt so quickly to combat situations." "Yes, sir. The answer is simple. We don't adapt to war. War adapts to us. We've been fighting for so long that we've turned conflict into an art form. And sometimes, the universe needs a little art to balance out all that cold, logical science." The galaxy was safe, saved by a species that had turned chaos into a weapon and madness into strategy. The Vorthak swarm, which had consumed countless civilizations through superior adaptation, had been defeated by opponents who refused to be predictable. As rescue ships began searching for survivors, the message was clear throughout the galaxy. Never underestimate a species that considers "hold my beer and watch this" to be a valid military strategy. The humans had saved everyone by doing what they did best, being absolutely, completely, and gloriously insane when it mattered most.